Hello, you guys. I just wanted to welcome you all for season 2 of Journalist Talk, the podcast from journalists to journalists. And in this season, I have a few amazing episodes already recorded and ready to publish for you guys. And I was just waiting for the right time, and I feel it is right now. So, without further ado, please enjoy this season as much as I enjoyed recording and editing for you guys. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Journalist Talk. And today we have Tammy Trujillo here. She is a broadcast professor, radialist, and a podcast. Hi Tammy.
Hello. Yeah.
Thank you for coming here today.
I'm very happy to talk with you.
Oh, me too. I'm kind of excited for this episode. I've been waiting for it because I couldn't do it before. You're my professor for a podcast class, so now we can do that. And as always, I ask for my guests to briefly introduce themselves, do a brief biography.
Okay. All right. Well, as you said, Tammy Trujillo, and Southern California, born and bred, and been on the radio since I was 19 years old. It was not the career that I was planning. I had plans to go into sports broadcasting and sports law, but turn of events with the baseball strike of 1981 and needing to find a job, ended up doing radio for what was going to be a short period of time. But then after the strike ended, things did not work out. And so I stayed in radio and worked really hard to start being able to do sports on the radio, because that was a time when women didn't. And the career just took off from there, doing sports, news, and traffic, both on radio and TV here in Southern California. Still on the air, news anchor for 89.3 KPCC, Southern California Public Radio, and also public affairs director for AM 830 KLAA. I started teaching when I was about 24 because a friend of mine who was also a broadcaster and taught could not fulfill a class that he was teaching, needed help, and I helped him out and just kept on teaching from that point on.
That's very interesting. It's like such a young age to start teaching, I guess, like journalism.
Yeah, it was actually an audio editing class, and you're right, my students were about 3 years younger than me, but yet I'd already been on the air 5 or 6 years at that point. So, while the ages were really close, the experience level wasn't. So it actually worked out really well. I enjoyed it and started pursuing teaching more.
That's very interesting.
I ended up at another couple colleges. What else about me? I've written 2 books that are textbooks on internship and news writing. They're used throughout the country. And got into podcasting about 5 years ago. So that's that's the long and short of it.
That's very interesting, but today I wanted to talk to you more about podcasting.
Okay, sure.
Which is something that recently I got really into it. And as time goes by, I keep searching for more to listen into and etc. How did you come up with ideas for your podcasts?
Well, podcasting was something that I've been aware of for about the last 8 or 9 years. I originally, I'll be honest with you, thought it was kind of one of those things that would come and go. I did not think it would become really big. I was wrong. It became really big. But it was not anything, honestly, that I ever really thought I would get into. Radio broadcasting has always been my thing, and podcasting, again, just didn't seem important. But I will tell you the story because it's a really weird story. It's a very weird story.
The floor is all yours.
Most of my stories are, you're right. One of the companies that I own is an animal transport business. We transport animals all over the country for rescues and fosters and just people who want to move their animals and can't put them on a plane. And we have a crew that does that, but this particular day, I had to make an emergency run with the dog out to Arizona. I had gotten up really early that morning, not anticipating that I would have a 12-hour drive that day. But, everybody else on our company was busy. My husband was out of town, so it was like, okay, I'm elected. So pick the dog, drive it all the way out to Prescott, Arizona, come back, and I'm driving back. It's about 11 at night. I've been up probably 16, 17 hours. And I don't know if you've ever driven from Arizona, but there's a stretch of the I-10 coming into California, out of AZ and coming into Arizona that it's just, there's nothing. It's pitch black. And at that time, there's no cars. So I'm literally out there alone on the desert, driving, trying to stay awake.
That's important.
Oh, yeah. no kidding. But I mean, I'm exhausted, right? I've still got 5 hours to go to get back to Los Angeles. And I started thinking about John Lennon. Now, I'm not a John Lennon fan. I'm not a Beatles fan. I don't dislike them, but I never really liked them a bunch. And thinking, why am I thinking about John Lennon? And then I started to think about what would it be like to talk to John Lennon? I mean, where is this stuff coming from? And over the course of about an hour, it turned into an idea about a podcast, about a weekly talk with John Lennon. And the title came to me, the logo came to me, everything. And I'm thinking, this is weird. This is just weird. Because why am I thinking of this stuff about somebody I don't even really care about? And once it kind of got all figured out, I called my husband. He was on the East Coast performing with Sean and Ah. And so it was like 3 or 4 in the morning there. I woke him up. And I said, I've got this crazy idea. Tell me, am I nuts or what? I explained to him. He goes, that is brilliant. Wow, I would listen to it. Talks with John was born. Basically learned the art of podcasting by doing Talks with John, because I had no clue. It went on to be 106 episodes. We won 8 international awards with it. It spawned a stage show that debuted in New York just before the pandemic. And of course, with the pandemic, all live shows were canceled. So the bookings that we had were going to take us through the summer all fell apart. But that's how I got into podcasting.
That's so interesting, because I was listening to Talks with John and I was like, why John? Why not like Paul McCartney, Elvis Presley, or some other artist, some other...
I agree with you.
Yeah, I was like, why? Is she like a secret Beatles fan or something?
Again,
that was part of my questions. I was like, how? Why John? Why John
obviously,
Lennon?
I knew who John Lennon was. I grew up with the Beatles. When I was a child, John's always been rather of an enigma, a very controversial figure. But honestly, yeah, I was as astounded too. When this stuff, personally, what I believe, and some people think I'm crazy, but I honestly do believe John gave that to me. I believe in the hereafter. I believe in spirits.
Yeah.
I do believe that for some reason, John tapped me.
I mean, you're alone in a dark place. He was like, hey, I have an idea for you. Why not?
Well, it's interesting because, I've tried to sort this out for years. A very good friend of mine had passed not that much earlier. Okay. Maybe a year earlier. He was another rock and roller celebrity, and he was very good friends with John, and very good friend of mine. It broke my heart when he passed. And we've always kind of thought, my husband and I, that maybe my friend was the intermediate between the two of us. And maybe John just really was feeling like, I wish I was still there to talk about what's going on, because our world is so upside down. John was all about peace. We have anything but peace, particularly now. Maybe somehow, I don't know how things work in the afterlife, but I kind of am of the impression that my friend was kind of the catalyst for this to occur.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Very, very, very nice to hear about it. I know that you're working right now in another podcast, the United States of Animals. Yes. I know now that you love animals. You have a company for them and etc. But how did you put that into a podcast? Like, I want to focus in a podcast about animals.
There's a lot of podcasts about animals out there, and they talk about animal training tips and things along those lines. They get into products and so forth. I didn't want to do something extraordinarily commercial because it's been done before. I think one of the keys to doing a good podcast is to take the topic, the broad topic, and go out and see what's being done under that topic heading, and then find a niche that's not being done. Find a niche that's not being done. There's where your podcast is. Because you don't want to do a podcast that everybody else is doing. But if you can find some angle nobody else is doing, now you've got something to really market. Something that says, we're the podcast that da-da-da-da-da. The thing that I think is most important about animals, and I'm a certified animal behaviorist as well, so I know how to work with animals. I've always been fascinated by the human-animal bond, the relationship. Now, a lot of people don't understand that. They have a dog or a cat or whatever, and they feed it and clean up after it and take it for walks and pat it. But they don't understand, unfortunately, that that's a sentient being. Yeah. That's a soul. That's a being. That's just not a food machine. It has feelings and emotions. It has desires. If they don't make that connection, they have lost out on something so spectacular.
You know, something that I saw on TikTok, it's been like 1 or 2 months already, but it's like, I have a dog, and I never introduced myself to him. He knows his name because I call him all the time. But he doesn't know his owner's name. Right. You never, introduce yourself to your dog. It's just like, hey, whatever the name of the dog, come here, let's play, here's the food. Yeah. But you never, say, hi, I'm this person and I'm your owner.
Right.
Yeah, and I was like, that's very interesting.
But it's right. You go adopt a dog and you do all your paperwork, right? If you get it at a shelter or a rescue or whatever, put it on a leash and you trot out the door. And it's like, this dog is going, who are you?
Why are you with me now?
Right? I'm on this leash and I don't even know who the heck you are. And now I'm supposed to go home with you. And would you do that with a person? Would you meet another person and just say, come on, we're going.
But if you think about it, we don't also introduce ourselves to our kids. No. Hi, I am this person and I'm your mother or your father.
It's amazing.
It's weird because people who comes to us, we know who they are. They don't know who we are.
I had a long time ago in one of my classes, I had my students do something. This was in an interview class, okay? Teaching people how to do radio and TV news interviews. And I had my students interview one of their parents. And they had a list of questions. And they could go off the list or they could just blow the list away. I didn't care. But I gave them a list so they'd know where to start. Almost all of those students came back to class saying, I learned so much about my mom or my dad that I didn't even know. And I'm like, you've lived with them 20 plus years and you had no idea your mom or your dad did this or that or the other thing. You're right. We don't even know the people that we're around intimately.
Yeah.
Because we don't take the time. And when it's another species, we're totally lost. Do you know a fish can recognize you?
A fish.
A fish.
Oh, that's crazy.
If you have a pet fish in a bowl, that fish will recognize your face.
That's interesting. I never stopped to think about it.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, the fish is looking at you all the time, isn't it? What do you think is going on up here?
Yeah.
It has a brain. So that's what the United States of Animals is about. It's about the human-animal relationship. It's talking to people who get it about their relationships with their animals and how they develop that relationship and what that relationship yields that ordinarily wouldn't be there. And we try to educate people on how to create that bond with your animal. I mean, you're going to spend, gosh knows how many thousands of dollars on this animal over its lifetime with vet care and food and what have you. If you're not getting your money's worth, and I don't mean that crassly, but you're not getting your money's worth if you and that animal you don't have a relationship of love and understanding. Plus it goes to, if an animal is doing something you don't like it to do. A friend of mine came to me once at a radio station I worked at, because everyone always comes to me with animal things, right? And she was upset because they brought home a new baby. They had a toddler, they had a new baby. They had a beautiful Aussie Shepherd, great with the toddler, did not like that baby.
Oh, no.
Growled at that baby. And she was really distraught. They were going to get rid of the dog. They couldn't get rid of the baby, right? And I said, wait a minute. Whoa.
Yeah.
And we sat down and we talked, and I talked to her husband on the phone. We kind of she was in the studio because she was at work
kind
with
of a
me.
Meeting.
We did. And I made them figure out what the dog's problem was. And the dog's problem was just exactly what would be a human problem if a baby came in the house and one of the kids got jealous. The dog was jealous. The dog was the baby.
That's something that I've heard a lot from my friends. When their parents had their siblings, the dog didn't like it because it wasn't ready for another person to be around.
Right. And all the attention, all the focus was going on the new baby.
Yeah.
Not the dog. And so we talked about how to bring the dog into the circle, because the dog felt pushed out.
Yeah. How
do we bring the dog back in the family? And we did some, they sound crazy, but we always refer to the dog first, not the baby. Refer to the dog first. Recognize the dog first. The baby became whatever the dog's name was, Fido. Fido's baby. So the dog knew its name, connected itself to the baby, as opposed to the baby being this thing over here. It now became the dog's baby. Concept worked. In a week, there was no more problem.
And then shifts, and then the dog is totally protective of the baby.
Oh, yeah, because this is a baby, and you want that. But at this point, the dog saw the baby as a threat. But now we brought them all back into a family. It took a week or two. And Christina came back. She said, "You'd never." I said, "Yeah, I would believe it, because we had to see it from the animal's perspective and understand. First off, the animal has a perspective.
Yeah,
they have a brain. It makes me crazy when I know how many people are living out there with animals, and they're missing it.
That's true.
Yeah. So that's what the USA is about. Our slogan is, "We're all humans and animals are created equal."
Yeah, so. I like that slogan. It's really good.
Thank you. It's a fun show to do.
Yeah.
I love it.
I bet it is.
Yeah.
It's you can know more stories and bring this perspective to people. People me until like 2 months ago, I didn't have this perspective. I was like, why should I present myself to my dog?
Yeah.
Okay, so we know that you had talks with John.
Yes.
You're working on the United States of Animals. And do you have any upcoming projects that you want to talk about, that you can talk about?
There are some. One of the podcasts I'm involved with is one here on campus at CSUN. It's called Voices from the Edge. And it is with two professors, Professor Ivor Weiner and David Boynes, and Mookie, who is the music director here at KCSN, and a graduate student, Izzy Argueta. The professors came to me last semester, and they wanted to do this podcast. They had a grant to do this podcast. Didn't know how to do it, and we put it together, and it's Voices from the Edge, where music, technology, and arts collide.
Okay.
Something like that. Anyway, we talk to professors on campus who, like anybody else, are way more than you think they are because they do all these other extraordinary things. It's kind of funny, it's kind of quirky, it gets real serious and heavy sometimes, but it's an hour-long interview, so I exec produce that. There is a podcast that is about to come down on antique doll collecting.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
That is another...
I wouldn't know what to talk about, antique dolls.
Well, dolls go back thousands and thousands of years, and doll collecting is, as I recall, the third largest collecting behind stamps and coins.
Okay.
Believe it or not, here in the U.S. at least, but also all over the world. You'd be surprised. And it's something I've been interested in since I was about 11. So this is kind of one of those things I've always wanted to do. We're launching it with the assistance of the United Federation of Doll Clubs.
That's so interesting. I'm mind blown right now.
So
because for me, there's Barbies and Pollys and those like baby dolls that you have when you're a kid.
Right.
And like the only past kind of doll that I imagine, like antique dolls, is those that looks like Annabelle, from the movie. Those that looks like a little bit scary when you go like to those antique markets, wherever you are, because like every city, they have one.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, I never stopped to think about like talking about dolls.
Well, you're the ones that like Annabelle, and I know totally what Annabelle is. You're talking about bisque dolls from about 1860 to about 1920, and I'm glad you're sitting down because I have been at doll auctions where those dolls have been auctioned off at $50,000, $60,000, $70,000.
Yeah, that's good that I'm sitting down.
I know. All of us grew up with dolls. Most of us girls did.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys did too. There are a lot of male doll collectors.
True.
Doll collecting as an adult is not about playing with them, certainly. It's about looking at them as works of art within their time frame. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You never own them. You're only allowed to have them to shepherd them for a while. Just to keep them safe. So Dollology 101 is coming out. There are a couple of others that are floating around too. There's one called Let's Rock About It.
If I can talk too much, it's not. It's okay.
No,
it's not a problem.
I have probably 200 hours of interviews with rock and rollers that I've done over the years. Some of them have even passed on, like the Righteous Brothers and Paul Revere. And I've sat on these interviews for a long time and never done anything with them. And so I started kicking around an idea recently of putting together a podcast just with those interviews. There's not much work to be done because the interviews are done.
Just edit them and
publish. And it'll be called Let's Rock About It. Let's talk about it. Let's rock about it. You got that.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love a play with words.
I know, right? And this one, these interviews were gotten for about 10 years. I was a member of a band called the Ohio Express. The Ohio Express is a band that was active in the 60s. I was not in it in the 60s. I joined the band in the year 2000. Ohio Express is the band that is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for creating the bubblegum music craze of the late 1960s. And in touring with Ohio Express over all those years, we would play with all of these other artists. And being a news anchor and loving to interview, I always had my tape recorder. So I'd be cornering people backstage, cornering people in limos, and getting their story down. Because, once we pass away, our stories go with us.
Yeah.
Unless somebody's got them down. And I have all of these on tape. And I didn't tape them for a purpose other than just because I had the opportunity to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So whipping those out, do something with them.
I mean, I get it. Like, the journalist instinct is just like to talk, to ask, to never stop like being curious about people, things. I think it's really interesting, like your projects, because it makes us think out of the box. Like I said, you have to find a niche that nobody's it's talking about it already. So
one I would love to do, and this is a time thing, obviously, is just to grab random people and get their story. You know, celebrities have stories. Okay, fine. But you know what? Your gardener has a story.
Everybody has a story.
Everybody has a story. And when you delve into it, sometimes they are just fascinating. When you look at somebody, you have no clue.
Yeah, and I think the podcast that you are the exec producer, it's very interesting here to talk about the lives of the professors. Because, like, for us, it's something not untouchable, I want to say, but it's very different. We have you guys as people that we respect, that we have a lot to learn from, and etc. But all of you have a life that it's not like, hey guys, well, turn to page blah blah blah.
Exactly.
Talking to you right now, it's opening so much that I didn't know about you. You have a lot of companies. You were in a band. You have tons of projects. you know, it's really interesting to get to know people. And I think, like, with this podcast that I'm doing right now, like, I want to talk about the experience of people in their professional lives. But at the same time, there's a lot of in our personal lives that influences our perspective and everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've always made an effort to get to know my students. Yeah. Because again, just like you look at us. And, okay, we're the professor, and you know what we're going to do. You're in my class, and you're supposed to learn stuff. But I have found some of the most amazing things out about my students when I've actually had the occasion to get them to talk to me and reveal who they are. Some of them have done amazing things. Some of them have been through incredible things. I can't even imagine they got through them. And I'm so proud of them. Honest to gosh, I think I've always seen the classroom not as me and them, but us as a team to do a task. And that task is to learn podcasting or learn audio editing or whatever. It's always been more fun for me if I knew my students and let them know me, and we break down that wall. My students call me Tammy. I rarely insist on Professor Trujillo because I don't want that.
The difference.
That gap. I want to be able to say, okay, you and me, we're going to learn audio editing. Come on, let's learn it.
Yeah, that's like, it's very different from Brazil because in college we're just like, hey, Tammy, we just call it for the first name or even nicknames if they're like, I prefer you call me this.
Right, sure. Yeah.
But then you come here and there's like some professors that if you miss say, for example, professor something, they're like, no, I'm a doctor.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, and there's like these things, and there's like, you always have to call it professors and the last name. Yeah. And there's like exceptions like you. But at the same time, it's very different. Like here, I think there is more of this gap than...
It's a countrywide difference.
Probably, yeah.
I had a student from Germany years ago. Really nice girl. And I'm German. And I speak German fluently. And so I was thrilled to have a student over here from Germany because, you know, first thing I did was tell her, hey, I'm German too. And I wanted to know all about Germany because I've never been there. She, one day, after a particularly difficult class, I had a student who was pretty difficult in the class. She came up to me and she said, can I ask you something? And she said, how do students get away with talking to the professors the way I've heard people talking to their professors here in America? She couldn't believe it. She said, in Germany, any student disrespect, they'd be out of that college like that. She was just amazed. And it took her forever to start calling me Tammy. I mean, she just couldn't do it. So there's a cultural difference because Germany is a much more formal, what do I want to say, not community, but culture. Brazil is more, hey,
we're more friendly, loose. And maybe loose. I think it's the right word
in a good way. Loose in a good way. Casual.
Okay, yeah.
So that makes sense that you'd have that, but here it's such a mix.
Yeah,
you know, we don't really have an American culture, so to speak, that's really broad. And gosh, you go to different parts of America, you'll find different cultures entirely, and they're so different. But I've just never been hung up on titles. Yeah. You know, I mean, I got my master's degree. I could go prancing around with a title, but title's a word. It doesn't mean you're better than anybody. Yeah. It means you have more education. It means you passed a licensing. You know, it means nothing. I don't get hung up on it.
It doesn't make any sense.
It creates a barrier.
Exactly.
It creates this phony barrier. Barriers stop us from things. That's what barriers are meant to do. And it's okay if you're putting a barrier around something physically that you want to protect. That's cool. But why do we want barriers between us? And how can I teach my students if I put a barrier? I personally can't. I like to have fun. I like to have fun in my classes.
That's true.
This is a job just like any other job. We go to it X number of hours a week, just like you go to your job X number of hours a week. And every job is a job, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, we're not digging a ditch. I wouldn't want that job. This is a better job, but it's still a job. So if I'm going to spend, I don't know, a fifth of my week doing it, I want to have fun doing it.
That's
and
true.
that's how I try to run my classes.
I mean, if you like your job, you're never really working.
And
I love this phrase.
It's a good
because,
phrase.
Yeah.
It's a good phrase.
That's what I tell my friends. They're like, oh my God, you have all these hours at the radio. I'm like, I don't even care. I'm having so much fun.
Well, see, you just said you're doing this. And
yeah.
This.
And then,
yeah, I do a million things, but I'm having a blast doing it. So, okay, so what else would I do? Go sit on the beach? Okay, that's nice to do. I do that sometimes. But I can't do that all the time.
Yeah.
So I do all these other things. Yeah.
That's
that phrase is a good one. I grew up with a mom single mom,
Mm-hmm.
you know, 2 teenage kids and a baby. And my mom was a county of LA dental assistant. And I watched my mom as I grew up, going to work hating it, coming back from a day that she hated, and hating the fact that tomorrow was going to be the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I watched that as a little kid. I mean, it was that obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no, that is not going to be me. Because it's horrible.
That's what I tell my parents. They're like, yeah, well, journalism's cool, but it's not where the money is, and etc. And I'm like, if I'm going through the money, I'm not going to be happy.
But you know what? It is where the money is, and I can tell you that for a fact.
Oh, please, I need that. I'm at the beginning of the career. I need to know where to go.
Well, there is quite a bit of money to be made in this industry.
No, I know, but like they were speaking in general, you know, like you can get... I was thinking before coming to journalism to do like law school.
Okay.
And it's like, okay, it seems better.
Oh, it was on my list at one point.
Exactly.
Yes.
I think like every journalist go through the law phase because like it's a place that you can defend and talk and have a lot of stuff, arguments, but at the same time, like in journalism, you're more loosened to talk about it. Some stuff.
You know what I always recommend to my college students that they take a couple of law courses.
Mm-hmm.
I have taken about a year and a half of law school.
Oh.
And I did not go with the intent of being a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
I went with the intent of learning law, contract law, so I could read my own contracts, write my own contracts, not sign contracts that, you know.
Just seems good.
I signed some stupid contracts when I started in this business, and I lost a lot of money because I didn't know how to read them. I'm scared to read them because they're long and they got long words in them, and I'm scared to read them. And so, you know, I just went, okay, I'll sign it, and made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
So I've always taught in fact, I used to teach a broadcast law class for quite a few years where my students learned to read contracts.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I recommend doing that because you're getting out in a business where you're going to do a lot of freelancing, you're going to sign a lot of contracts.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, there is good money to be made in this industry. You've got to work hard.
Yeah.
But it's there. It is there.
Just have to go get it.
Yeah.
Do your best, the job. But I feel like in the area that I want, you wouldn't have that much because I want to do something more cultural. More like feature stories and etc. I don't know.
You know what? If you had been talking to me 15 years ago, I would have told you, yeah, good luck with that. We're changing. Culturally, and we are more interested in each other, thank God, than we ever have been. I think, personal opinion here, we're looking at different groups are now emerging from the shadows. They were already there, but they're emerging from the shadows, and they're not actually just emerging. Emerging sounds like they're sneaking out quietly. They're bursting out.
Yeah.
And we're celebrating them in many cases. So I think now is a right time for what you want to do.
I'm happy to know.
Just my opinion as a broadcaster, but I do. You also bring an interesting perspective of it because you're not American.
Yeah.
You know, when you're dealing in your own culture, you kind of sometimes get a little defensive about your culture. You're coming in as a very objective person because you're viewing it all.
Yeah.
American culture. You're viewing it. You're viewing these different cultures. So I think you have a unique perspective.
Yeah.
Where you come in wide open.
I love the dynamic that I have at home. I have 3 roommates, and one of them is always like at home with me, so we are always talking, and she's from Connecticut.
Okay.
And at the same time, they're like, okay, so Californians do that. That's weird. But at the same time, she's like, oh my gosh, we do that, this and that. And I'm like, that's so weird. And she's like, that's an American thing. Like, you are saying, like, crazy things to me right now. And I'm like, no, you are the one saying. And that's, like, this shock of cultures. We have so much fun doing that. Yeah, so just to finish, can you give an advice for people who are starting their podcast now or think their idea are not enough to start something?
Okay. Oh, geez. Well, the bottom line is you're never going to do anything unless you start, okay? Thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it is not going to get you to start. That's just going to delay you. Mm-hmm. The first piece of advice is if you have an idea, get a USB mic, plug it into your laptop, and start talking. And see if what you have in your head can actually come out of your mouth. Find a podcast coach. I have a company that does that. That if somebody says, I want to do a podcast, they don't want to go to a college and learn, like, you're taking podcasting. Mm-hmm. You took podcasting here at Seaside. I have an online class that anybody can take and download. And it depending on what package they buy, and I'm not doing commercials, I'm not going to tell you the name of it, but I don't want it to be a commercial. Depending on the package they buy, they can do some Zoom sessions directly with me.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah. There's a lot of education out there on how to do a podcast. Mm-hmm. Listen to podcasts, particularly in the area of your topic. And when you like something, write down, oh, I like that. What is that? Because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Mm-hmm. Okay? Yeah. Write down the things you like so that you know, oh, I want to do that in my podcast. And then write down things in podcasts that you hear that you don't like at all. You don't like it. Oh, that's horrible. And write that down and learn from that list.
Yeah.
Podcasting, one of the cool things about podcasting is anybody can do a podcast. No, not everybody can do a good one.
Okay. But rephrase it. There's time.
Well, I want to put that caveat. Not everybody can do a good podcast, but everybody can do a podcast. Mm-hmm. So get the name, get the concept, get the .com for it so you have that identity. Find a logo designer to draw a logo, or go on Canva and do your own logo. Just get started.
Get started, everyone.
Yep.
So thank you so much for coming and talking to me, Tammy. It was such a fun time and such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
And so, everyone, I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to Journalist Talk.